Number 1. Gail DeLano. In 1986, Gail DeLano was a single mother of two from Maine. She was 34 years old when she disappeared. She was a lonely woman, having married and divorced twice. She sought companionship through the newspaper's personal ads. On June 21, 1986, she told her teenage sons that she was excited to meet a new man she had met through the personal ads, a man named John. She set off to meet him at a Howard Johnson's restaurant for lunch. She had told her sons that she would likely be out for the night. When Gail's son, Ryan, returned home that evening, he discovered that his mother was not home. The next day, when she was still not home, her family called the police. Gail's car was found abandoned at the restaurant, and at first authorities did not suspect foul play, as Gail would sometimes spend the night with friends or dates, so it was assumed that she would eventually come home. However, her family was convinced that she had met with foul play. When Gail's car was searched, nothing was found of interest. 2 hours later, a busboy at the restaurant found a set of keys where Gail's car was parked. 2 weeks after that, a 9-year-old boy found Gail's purse in the bushes of the restaurant. Although the purse appeared to be untouched, there was no money in it, including $50 from a secret compartment she set aside for emergencies. Her family stated that only she and her family knew about this compartment. After this discovery, police began to suspect foul play. Based on her date book, detectives questioned men whom Gail had dated in the past year. All of the men had alibis for the time of her disappearance, including a man named John. This man is not believed to be the man Gail was going on a date with. Despite keeping records of all the men whom had called her, Gail, for unknown reasons, had not recorded her date, John's full name, or personal information. Her friends and family began to wonder if she had engineered her own disappearance. A new theory emerged when police interviewed a radio DJ named Kristen Roy, who said that Gail had called the station multiple times prior to her disappearance, and he felt that she was suffering from depression. Authorities suspected that Gail may have disappeared and committed suicide elsewhere. Her family considered the possibility, but did not believe that she would do that to her family. Gail's family began circulating missing person flyers with truckers. 1 year after Gail vanished, a trucker named John Scott recognized her photograph as a woman whom he had given a ride to several months earlier. The trucker did notice some pill bottles but did not know what was contained in them. He was certain that the woman he had given ride to was Gail, especially because of her northern accent. This led authorities to believe that Gail may have engineered her own disappearance for unknown reasons. Nearly 2 years went by and her baffling case was profiled by Unsolved Mysteries. A medical examiner from Alabama recognized the woman profiled in the show as one that he had found in a hotel. Forensic tests confirmed that she was Gail, and her family held a memorial service for her in Brunswick, Maine on November 11, 1988. She was buried in Mobile, Alabama. It was apparent it was a suicide as the woman checked into the hotel under an assumed name, Jackie Stafford. She had also ingested a large amount of a prescription medication. Number 2. Marx Panama Moriarty Bonds. In 1977, Mark Barnes and Charlotte Moriarty lived together in Hawaii. At the beginning of the year, Charlotte gave birth to a son named Marx Panama Moriarty Bonds. On June 21st, Charlotte Moriarty put their 6-month-old son, Marx Panama, into his stroller and headed off to shop at a store just 3 blocks from their home. Neither of them returned home that day. After Mark notified police, they conducted an extensive search of the island but found no trace of either Charlotte or Marx. Shortly after running away with her son, Charlotte Moriarty was arrested for breaking into a house. She told police her name was Jane Amia and that her son's name was Tenzin. Charlotte was confined to a psychiatric hospital while Marx was sent to live in an orphanage. When Marx was 3, he was adopted by Steve and Pat Carter. They had no idea Marx had been abducted from his father. In 2011, 34-year-old Marx was following a news story about Carlina White, an abducted infant reunited with her biological mother after 23 years. Marx began to suspect he may have been abducted and browsed missing children's websites. He came across a profile for Marx Panama Moriarty bonds and was stunned by how much the age progression sketch of Marx resembled him. DNA testing confirmed that he was the missing child, and Marx was reunited with his biological father after 34 years. Charlotte Moriarty's current whereabouts are unknown. Number 3. Sammy Wheeler. On June 7, 1992, 36-year-old Sammy Villa was found brutally murdered in his car, shot 6 times, and apparently robbed while parked at the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. The killer had gone to great lengths to clean the crime scene. All shell casings and fingerprints were removed, and the killer had tried unsuccessfully to ignite the vehicle. Investigators believe that he was killed at around 1 a.m. They learned that he had gone to the forest and planned to go fishing on the day he was killed. After discovering that Sammy's wallet was missing, the FBI assumed that his murder was a random act of violence. However, 3 suspects soon emerged that suggested that he may have known his killer. Sammy's girlfriend, Pat Sneed, her ex-husband, Bob Bean, and Sammy's twin brother, Danny, had all been considered suspects, each of them placing the blame on the other. The story began in the fall of 1991, when Pat moved into a rental unit owned by Danny. The property was divided into 2 apartments. Sammy lived in one with Pat and her 2 sons, while Danny lived in the other. The arrangement worked well for everyone except for Bob. He asked Pat to live separately from Sammy, but she did not want to. In February 1992, a court order required that Sammy would not be allowed to be around Pat if she was with her sons. In order for this situation to work, Sammy moved into Danny's apartment. Bob was still suspicious, so he hired a private investigator to ensure that the court order was obeyed. The private investigator claimed that Sammy violated it, but Danny said that this was not true. Sammy decided that he would sleep in his truck in order to show that he was not doing so. Bob claims that he and Sammy were cordial to one another, but Danny says that this is not true. He believes that Bob hated Sammy and that he is a liar. Pat agreed with Danny, stating that Sammy did not trust Bob. On June 3, 1992, at around 5:30 a.m., Sammy left Danny's apartment and found Bob's son taking pictures of him. Sammy confronted Bob's son and told him that he was not violating the court order. Danny believes that Bob hired a hitman to kill Sammy because he was unhappy about losing Pat and that he was living with her. Danny claims that Sammy and Pat were going to get married the week after his death. However, Bob claims that he was not upset that they were going to do so. He also appeared to have a perfect alibi. He was on maneuvers with his Army National Guard unit on the night of Sammy's murder. The camp he was at was about 150 miles away. It would have been physically impossible for him to commit the crime. He also claimed that he did not have money to hire a hitman to kill Sammy. After Bob was cleared of any involvement by the police, he claimed that Pat was the real killer, saying that she did not have a concrete alibi for the time of Sammy's murder. He first suspected that she was the killer when their 2 sons told him that they went to the forest the day the Sammy was killed. They allegedly said specific details about the crime that he does not believe they would have learned secondhand. He even videotaped them talking about what they knew. He then presented the tape to the police. Danny believes that Bob coached his sons into making false statements about their mother. Authorities seemed to agree, as they dismissed the testimony as unreliable. They also believed that Pat also had an airtight alibi. She claimed to have been at home with the boys at the time of Sammy's murder. She was also eventually eliminated as a suspect. After Pat was cleared, Bob once again told the police of a possible suspect. This time it was Danny. Bob believes that Danny may have killed Sammy because he was in love with Pat. At first, Pat assumed that Bob was responsible, but she now also suspected that Danny was involved. After Sammy's death, Danny told one of her friends that he was in love with her. He, however, claims that he was not attracted to her. On the morning of Sammy's murder, his father and the police sergeant broke the news to Danny and Pat. Danny apparently began yelling and saying that Bob was the killer. He then grabbed his shotgun and ran for Bob's house. His father was able to calm him down. Pat believes that his hysterical reaction was a clever ploy to hide the fact that he was the killer. Once again, however, the authorities were able to confirm that he also had an alibi for the night of Sammy's murder. Several witnesses saw him bar hopping into the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. Based on the evidence, the FBI had ruled out Bob, Pat, and Danny in the case. However, they still believed that each should be considered a possible suspect. With the investigations stalled, Sammy's family hired private investigator Alan Cates in March 1998. Within a few months, he located a witness who was with 29-year-old Guy Jackson Price on the morning of June 7, 1992. The witness claimed that he was with Price when he robbed and killed Sammy. As the FBI originally suspected, the murder was indeed a random act of violence. On July 24, 1998, Price was arrested and charged with the murder. He was later convicted and is now serving a life sentence. Number 4. The Schuessler-Peterson Murders. It was a Sunday in October 1955 when three Chicago boys, Robert Peterson, 14, John Schuessler, 13, and his brother Anton, 11, decided to venture downtown for a matinee. Peterson's mother helped them to pick out a film, Disney's African Lion, and sent them on their way. They never returned. Hours later, when the boys didn't arrive home, their concerned parents notified the police. 2 days later, the boys' naked and bound bodies were discovered in a shallow ditch about 100 feet east of Des Plaines River. A salesman who had stopped to eat his lunch at the Robinson Woods Indian Burial Grounds spotted them and called the police. A coroner stated that the cause of death was asphyxiation. The three boys had been dead for 36 hours when they were discovered. Robert Peterson had been struck repeatedly and had been strangled with a rope or a necktie. The killer had used adhesive tape to cover the eyes of all three victims. They had then been thrown from a vehicle. Their clothing was never discovered. Police officers combed the area, conducting door-to-door searches and neighborhood interrogations. Search teams combed Robinson Woods, looking for clues or items of clothing, but couldn't find anything. The killer had gone to great lengths to get rid of any signs of fingerprints or traces of evidence. It wouldn't be until 40 years later, in the summer of 1994, that the police would find a suspect. Police were investigating the unrelated 1977 case of missing candy heiress and equestrian Helen Voorhees Brach and some suspected horse slayings when tips led them to the home of Kenneth Hansen. Hansen was reported to have been nervous about the investigation and had asked neighbors if police had been watching his home. Hansen was arrested in connection to the arson of a horse stable in 1972. It was during Hansen's trials that prosecutors alleged that Hansen had picked up the boys as they were hitchhiking home and brought them back to the stable he had worked for at the time. There he raped at least one of the boys, strangled all three, and then discarded them in the nearby nature preserve. The prosecution's case rested heavily upon the testimony of Roger Spry, who worked with Hansen at the stables. Spry was only 15 years old at the time, but claims that not only did Hansen sexually abuse him, but at some point Hansen had admitted to the killings. According to Spry, Hansen told him that the first boy's murder was an accident. He had been molesting two of the boys when the third boy walked up on the act. He grabbed the boy by the throat and strangled him. Spry claimed that Hansen had then told him that he had no other choice but to kill the other two. 3 other witnesses also claimed that Hansen had confessed to the murders, but there was no physical evidence to link Hansen to the crime or evidence that boys had been sexually assaulted. Hansen claimed that he was on his honeymoon the day the boys had disappeared and denied any involvement in the murders. Unfortunately for Hansen's defense, after 40 years, there was no way to confirm the exact dates of Hansen's alleged honeymoon, and his alibi was seen as questionable by the jury. Hansen was found guilty and sentenced to 200 to 300 years in prison, but the Illinois Appellate Court overturned the conviction 5 years later, after determining that jury should not have heard evidence that Mr. Hansen had cruised the streets picking up boys for sexual relations. Hansen went on trial again in 2002, and after deliberating a little more than 2 hours, jury found him guilty again. Hansen was again sentenced to 200 to 300 years in prison. In 2007, Hansen died in prison of natural causes, and the case was officially closed. Number 5. Kari Lynn Nixon. On the night of June 22, 1987, 16-year-old Kari Lynn Nixon left her home to buy some groceries at a nearby store and left at around 9:55 p.m. She exchanged greetings with her neighbor at around 10:05 p.m. This would be the last time she was seen alive. Somehow, she disappeared within just 700 feet from her home. The next day, her family contacted the police when she didn't arrive home that night. A massive search was launched, but no trace of her was found. Some people believed that she was abducted by a stranger, while others believed that she simply ran away. She was close to her family and did not have any problems with her home life, nor did she take any extra money or belongings with her, suggesting that she was most likely abducted. However, she also made some interesting comments to a friend, claiming that she wanted to leave the area, possibly going to California or Florida. In November 1987, the New York State Police received a letter from Flint, Michigan, claiming that she was in Utahville, South Carolina area. Her family went to the area and put up several missing persons posters. Soon, Shirley Canapel, a Utahville resident, came forward claiming that she encountered Kari during the summer of 1987. Under hypnosis, she remembered being introduced to a girl who had called herself Kari Nixon, who claimed that she was from New York. She said that Kari had 2 earrings and long brown hair. She apparently seemed shy and unwilling to talk to Shirley. Authorities located the girl that Shirley claims was with Kari the day she met her, but she had a memory lapse and was unable to recall the events. Investigators looked into over 70 sightings of Kari, but were uncertain if she was still alive. Then, on June 5, 1989, the New Kids on the Block filmed a music video at one of their concerts in Los Angeles, California. In March 1991, Kari's parents viewed it and noticed a girl in the audience that looked just like her. Investigators also believed that they were most likely the same person. A detailed analysis of the video showed that the girl had almost identical hair length, hair color, face shape, and number of earrings in her right ear as Kari did before she vanished. The New Kids on the Block members, Jordan and Jonathan Knight, made personal appeals to Kari to come forward. However, the young girl in the video would later come forward and identify herself. She was a teenager from Washington, D.C. and not Kari. Then, on January 28, 1994, almost 7 years after Kari vanished, her body was unearthed in a shallow grave only miles from her home. Later, Robert Anthony Jones confessed to her kidnapping, rape, and murder. He had been arrested for numerous bank robberies. He had confessed to her murder in an effort to get his wife, Teresa, a lighter sentence for driving the getaway car from a local bank heist with their 2 children inside. He had kidnapped Kari at gunpoint and drove her to his parents' camp, where he raped, strangled, and shot her. He buried her on the remote J property on the following morning. Under the negotiated plea, he secured an 18 years of life sentence for the robberies and her murder. He had stated that he abducted her because of marital difficulties, claiming Teresa had cheated on him, as well as claiming he had committed robbery in order to intentionally get caught.